Okay, we're recording now. All right. Thank you everyone for joining our Brinc Webinar Series. I'm Andrew McCarthy, Head of Marketing at Brinc. Our webinar series is really focused on helping startups navigate through the hurdles of entrepreneurship. And this month's webinar is with Hannah Lau, who's going to be focusing on market entry to Asia. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Andrew. Welcome, everyone. It is a real honor and privilege to be here with you today. I understand that obviously because of the topic, we have many people joining us who are from outside of Asia, figuring out how to get in. But we look at the guest list and we see a lot of people of our friends from Asia as well. So I hope that today's webinar will be and helpful, but also that we can have some fun together. So just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Hannah Lau, and I'm originally from Canada. My parents are Hong Kong immigrants to Canada back in the 70s, and so I was born and raised there. And then I have spent my adult life here in Asia. I started with a career in advertising in China and Singapore. And then since moving to Hong Kong, I have been running a consultancy called Astera Asia, which I am also the founder of. Astera Asia, we offer corporate level expertise, nuanced for Asia, as a guide for startups, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations. Essentially, we want to help really small outfits in getting off the ground or just building themselves up. And we consult in areas such as organizational development, communications and design, training, and coaching. And so there's a website there if you're interested to find out more. So that's a little bit about me and my team and my company. So on to today's webinar. Today's topic is incredibly large. Andrew and I were just talking before we got started, just how broad this topic really is today. And don't worry, we won't be here for 6 hours. We will finish on time. But that means that we're taking a very broad overview approach to today's information. The goal is to give you sort of a taste test, a sample, a sneak peek of what it looks like to enter the Asia market. It will not have the answers to all the million questions I'm sure you may have, and it won't be exactly industry specific for you. So I hope just to manage expectations a little bit. I was just looking at the registration list, and there are people on this webinar today from a wide variety of industries and sectors, and from tech to FMCG, to healthcare, just a wide variety of different things. And so it wouldn't be possible for me to get too much into the nitty-gritty of everything. So if after this you have questions that are really specific, like, I don't know, tax law or supply chain or legal regulations, I think those are separate avenues of research that you'll have to go down. But today I'm really hoping just to give you a sample and an overview of what it looks like to enter the Asia market. So today, we'll be doing a very brief introduction to Asia. Asia is a big place, but I'll do my best to frame it a little bit for us. And then I'll introduce you to an approach. I won't say it's the only approach, there's obviously many approaches, but what I would recommend to be the approach of entering the Asian market. We'll go through some tips and reminders, and then we'll finish with a time of Q&A. I'm going to try to keep the presentation on the shorter end of things so that we can have more time for questions. And Andrew's going to be helping manage the chat box. And so if while I'm talking you have questions, feel free to just type them in, but we'll wait till the end of the presentation to address those questions. So thank you to Andrew for helping field that part. All right, so with our agenda in mind, I hope that today's takeaway from this will be that you will know what kind of questions you need to be asking approaching the Asian market, right? Like I said, you're not going to have all the answers, but you'll at least know what the right questions to ask will be, and that you'll be able to approach this journey systematically. there are many people who would enter Asia and just sort of drop into Asia and just think, well, I can just set up camp here and just start doing it without really planning or thinking through the implications. And I think especially for startups and the Brinc audience, we just don't have that level of resources or time or energy to be just randomly throwing things around like that. And so I'm hoping that what we go through today will help you start with the right thinking that will lead to the right doing. Starting with thinking first and then doing. That's really the way I've always approached it with my clients and with myself as well. And so hopefully that's what you can take away from today. All right, and so let's dive in. So we'll start with a brief introduction to Asia. And I'd like to start by showing this slide because it really does just give a visual depiction of the both and concept. For those of you with us today that are from a Western context, a Western thinking, a Western market, a lot of the times we think, is something this or that, things are much more clear. Okay, are we going in this direction or this direction? But in Asia, in Eastern thinking, and the diversity of the market, it's not so much this or this, but it's more both and. Asia is both what you see on the top of this page and also what you see on the bottom. And so to have to categorize it into one or the other would be a misunderstanding and also oversimplifying what Asia has to offer. And though there's a lot of complexities, we'll continue to talk through this throughout today's webinar, that those complexities are difficult to navigate, but they actually can make things a lot of fun and give a lot of opportunities, especially for startups coming into this part of the world. So just to start off, just to shift your mindset a little bit, especially if you're coming from a Western context, that in Asia, it's really a both and type of mentality. So taking a brief look at the world map, what's in the blue box is Asia, and we're looking at approximately 48 to 50 countries within this geographic space. That includes 60% of the world's population. The top two most populous countries in the world, China and India, are in this geographic space. And it represents approximately 2,300 languages spoken. That's a lot. And I haven't even mentioned anything about the diversity of cultures, many of them ancient cultures actually, legal systems, currencies, market maturity, socioeconomic status, demographics. I mean, it's just a lot. But I'm telling you this not because I want to scare you. I do not want to scare you, and I don't want to push you away from entering the Asian market. Like I said, there's a lot of great opportunity here, but I think it's important before diving into the Asian market to really understand the breadth of what we're dealing with. So that, it's not just diving in and saying, well, let's just expand into Asia and, just, seeing how things are going to go. To really have a good understanding of the broad range of diversity that's taking place here is really important. So entering the Asia market is not impossible. I want to say that up front. However, it is not easily done well for all the reasons I just mentioned. Asia is a fast and diverse changing market. And to even call Asia one market is actually oversimplifying it in a way. It's incredibly fast. So things are always changing, always evolving, going forwards, but also sometimes going backwards. And so be prepared for the speed of what it will take to enter this market. And I really like the way that this photo here, this photo is from Vietnam, and it really depicts sort of like the and both mentality I was telling you about earlier. But you see there's something relatively, on the more high-tech side of things. You have traffic, you have, motorcycles, and then you have a street food vendor who's clearly in a very traditional, using traditional equipment and selling things in a very traditional way. And this is what Asia looks like in many parts of Asia, where you have this juxtaposition coexisting at the same time. And so it makes it even more difficult to say, is it this or this? Everything is true in some part of Asia or even in the same country. So especially in a market like China or India, everything is true in some part. So people would say, oh, can you say that China is like this? Or is it like this, or what about that? And the answer is yes to all the above. Somewhere in China, what you just said is true. And so, even this topic that we have today called market entry to Asia is even a little bit misleading, because when you say market entry to Asia, well, where in Asia? What part of Asia? What are we really talking about here? So within Asia, you have extremely rich and you have extremely poor, and everything in between. You have advanced and outdated, and you have emerging and developed. I think for a while, people were talking about, Asia being an emerging market. I don't know if you've heard of it said like that before, but that was sort of the terminology that was being used. But so much of Asia has emerged already, and it's already been developed, while other parts of it are still emerging. And then you have some places that are very monocultural, while some places are highly multicultural, even within its own country or even within its own city. So this is the kind of breadth that we're talking about here. And again, I'm not trying to discourage you or scare you, but to hopefully help you see that within all this complexity, there's immense opportunity. I came to Asia about 15 years ago, and Asia has always been said to be, the next big thing. I would say it's already the big thing. And I'm not going to get into the politics of all this, but even without looking at things politically and, just looking at it economically, and then in terms of where the people and the culture and different societies are growing and changing, it really is already the next big thing. And so I'm excited to even be giving this webinar today, because knowing that there's an audience that really wants to come in to Asia and really see what opportunities there are. So like I said, that's a really brief introduction to Asia, but hopefully that helps you frame the thinking a little bit. And now I'd like to move on to the approach that I was talking about. And hopefully this will help you then think about how you could bring your business and your startup into the Asia market. So introducing an approach. Like I said, this is not the only approach. I'm sure if you hit Google, there's a bunch of them out there. But just with my experience with my clients and just doing a lot of cross-cultural overseas work, I found that this is probably one of the more simple approaches, but also gets into the level of depth that's needed to think through this. So what we have here is the path, the product, and the people up top, and then you have it all undergirded by the plan. And the way that we approach the path, the product, and the people, it all happens simultaneously, actually. So it's not that we do the path first necessarily, or the product second, and the people last. It's actually all happening at the same time. But you do need to see it as three separate categories, and I'll explain how it overlaps in a moment. And then finally, once you've done the pink boxes, it should easily culminate into a plan that will help guide you forward. So let's dive into this. So let's start with the path. This part of the process of the approach, especially when you're looking at Asia, should take the longest. And so I really encourage you to take time in this part of the exploration process to do it right. Don't rush it. Give yourself the time to do it. Do not randomly pick a path of entry into Asia. Hopefully everything that I've said thus far already deters you from doing that, because it is really like finding a needle in a haystack, and you can't just close your eyes and sort of pick one, kind of thing. Identifying an entry point into the Asia market takes a lot of intentionality. It takes a lot of strategic planning and thinking and asking the big questions up front. And so I've listed some of them here. Obviously, there's so many more than this. but hopefully this will get you started, to think about why you're expanding into Asia. I have heard people say, well, everyone else is going to Asia, so we should be there too. Our competitors are there, or I have family members who can help me there set up shop, or I have a friend there, and those could be reasons, but I really challenge and encourage you to think through if that really is the right reason and valid enough reason to expand into Asia. How does Asia fit into your existing operations? Again, I'm not discouraging anybody from doing it, but Asia is not for every product, every service, every industry. There are certain things out there that just don't work in Asia, and it's better to think that through before you throw a lot of resources into trying things out, especially with a small startup operation. So it's really important to think through whether this will fit your existing operations. I have seen examples where it might actually derail something that you've got going on that's already really good, and Asia just isn't the right fit for you. And what you had before was actually, really successful and really strong. So don't let, the everybody's going to Asia thing, sidetrack you from what you've already been doing, and considering what barriers might arise. And again, this is not an exhaustive list of, you can't think of everything that's going to come up against you, but at least to start putting something on paper and thinking through what those possibilities are. And then, of course, on the right side, we're looking at a specific market opportunity. There are many who would come into Asia and just say, okay, we're just gonna throw spaghetti on a wall and see what sticks type of approach. But before doing that, you don't want to waste resources. It's important to look at specific market opportunities. I'm not saying it has to be one, because that's keeping it pretty narrow, but at least have it boiled down to a good handful of ideas that you can then test and think through, as opposed to just casting the net everywhere, which will be a serious drain. So, is there an actual gap to fill? What are the potential target audiences? And is there even a ready market? Market readiness is something that is, again, a huge topic. It could be 10 other webinars on market readiness. But because Asia is so diverse and changing so quickly, market readiness is something that you really have to have a pulse on for your sector, for your product, for your service, whatever it happens to be. Some things just don't work in certain parts of Asia, not because it'll never work, but just because the market isn't ready. As a sort of just throwing an example, the US, for those of you who are familiar with Costco, the warehouse retailer, everyone loves Costco who's ever been to Costco, but then bringing Costco to Asia, it wasn't just that they just went to the biggest cities and just set up a Costco thinking they could reach the most amount of people. There was a lot of consideration. I don't work for Costco, by the way, nor do I have any vested interest in it, but I think it's just a good example of what works and what doesn't, and market readiness. Costco did not enter all the biggest cities at once. They started coming into Asia in the late 90s, in 1998, and starting in Taiwan, actually. And only 2 years ago did they open in Shanghai. Now, I won't get into the intricacies of why they chose to do that, but all to say that, it wasn't just tossing it out and figuring out what works. It was thinking through things and testing market readiness over time before making big moves like that and before entering certain markets. And so, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the path, finding that entry point or several entry points to at least be able to test and focus your resources on. So that's the path. And now we'll move on to the product. Sorry, I'm moving quite quickly through this because I want to give us enough time to get to some Q&A as well. All right, so the product. I know that we've got a wide variety of products or services or offerings, what have you, on this webinar today. So I'm not going to, get too particular, but I do want to say up front, do not assume a plug and play. I have seen that happen, and it is disastrous. And even if you know someone that it worked for, please, please, please consider that the exception and not the rule. The plug and play, meaning that you don't have to adapt your product. Maybe maybe you've got an app in X country and you just drop it into Hong Kong, or you drop it into Singapore, you drop it into India, and you're just going to assume that it's going to work. People in India are going to love it. That's what I mean by plug and play. And please do not assume that, because 99.999 times out of 100, it just isn't the case. And the fallout on the other side of doing that is actually way more expensive than doing proper research and having thought through it on the front end. And so I encourage you to think through for your product, what kind of need or what kind of gap is it really filling in the Asia market, and what part of the Asia market, specifically. And then determining upfront what parts of your product or service is adaptable and which isn't. As we're talking to startups here, I'm talking to a group of entrepreneurs here today. Everything that we've created is like our baby, right? And we treasure it so much. We put so much energy and heart and soul into it. And I think it is incredibly important to not be reactive when it comes to adapting your product. You don't want that decision made for you, right? You don't want to go into a market and then someone there says, well, if only you did it like this, then we would accept it. Or if only you lost this and put this there instead. And you just keep morphing to appease whatever, is there. Now, you should be ready to adapt, but you want to be in control of that. I think as the entrepreneur, as the person who owns or, has created this thing, you want to have control over that narrative. And so determining upfront what parts of your product are adaptable and which parts are not, I think at least is a worthy exercise to go through with you and your team, or with, fellow founders and things like that, before having a market feedback and say, well, you should just do it like this and turn the whole thing upside down. So that's on the adapting part. I encourage you to think big, but start small. So think big being, yes, we're looking at Asia, but to start small, it's got to be bite size. Test your product in a wide variety of microcosm scenarios. So what you want to do is have various testing situations, or, areas that you're going to test in, angles, approaches, but have them be small so that they're manageable for you, both from a testing perspective and then also from a resourcing perspective. Also narrowing down the process so that you can track it better. You're going to be learning a ton from testing your product in places, and what you don't want is for it to be too broad that you aren't able to draw meaningful conclusions. So for example, don't test all of China at once, find certain places in China, or find whatever it is, but narrow it down to something that's very manageable for you. So that's the product. And now we'll move on to the people. When I talk about the people, I'm not really talking about target audience. I think we mentioned that earlier. But what I mean with the people is actually your team. So, this is the people in your startup, your stakeholders, your investors, whoever it is that you're working with. You cannot do this alone. You cannot enter the Asian market alone. So the people that you have already are at minimum what you need, if not more than that. You're going to need people on the ground, partners, network, all that kind of stuff. But the first place to ask the questions is your existing team ready for the Asian market? And how will they support this move? This is incredibly important to think about, because there's so many cases where people want the product to go overseas into Asia. Okay, but the people part is just forgotten, and it falls apart because not because the product's bad, not because the service is bad, but because so much of execution counts on just having the right people to support the move. So we're looking at culture, logistics, operations. I mean, even cultural dynamics within teams can throw things off. Managing different time zones can slow down a ton of things. Are people ready for that, you know, for the implications of that? And then who will you have on the ground? Are you going to be putting in your existing team? Dropping a few people into Vietnam and seeing how it goes, you know, or are you gonna have local partners? Are you going to have people who will support you there? Thinking through the people piece is absolutely paramount. And so what we've done is we've talked really quickly through the path, the product, and the people, and you'll see that all three of them do work at the same time and overlapping each other as well. So it's not that you only think about the path when you're thinking about the path, but the product and the people part do come into play. But it is important nonetheless to address each of these three categories. And then finally, we come to the plan. And so after all this thinking, after all this, you know, exploring and asking questions, hopefully you'll be getting the answers that you need to put together the plan. And this is where everything comes together. It's finding the meeting point between the path and the product. So the path was your entry point, and the product was what kind of gap you're going to fill. What is this product or service going to be in Asia? And so where the path and the product are able to meet, that's sort of at least one of your starting points. I encourage you to put together a plan, again, not because you have found all the answers, because you will never find the answers. Let me just say that up front. But the plan will help you in not knowing everything. And that is going to be an immense support to you and your team. It will help you at least map out what you don't know, and then you can take the time and steps to figure it out. So things like, you know, researching continuously, constantly researching, testing systematically and methodically. We talked about that a little bit earlier. You know, it's a test, tweak, repeat process. You test, you tweak, you repeat, you test, and it's never over because, like I said, Asia's changing all the time. Your market readiness is changing all the time. You can never have all the answers. So you always have to be evolving. And then finally, you know, your plan needs to have set milestones to review, adjust as you move along. And so hopefully that will, having all that together will give you a good starting point to point you in the right direction. So you're not just randomly going about it. So that's the approach. And like I said, it's not really rocket science, but it's more of taking that intention of thinking through things, the thinking before the doing. And that'll hopefully save you a lot of time and headache before diving into it. So before we get to the Q&A, I'd just like to share a few tips and reminders. Hopefully these will be helpful for you as well. Do not underestimate what it will take. And again, I have no doubt that this audience here today, those of you listening, are incredibly smart, experienced, well-versed in your industry. But it's not that you're not smart. It's that Asia is just a beast. And it's so many things. So better to have an expectation of not underestimating what it will take. I encourage you to move quickly. Like I said, because change is happening so frequently that if you're researching one thing, if you wait too long, it's going to be different. You know, you're always sort of behind the 8 ball. So move quickly, but strategically. And this is why you need dedicated resources to looking at your approach to Asia, because the research and the testing and that approach alone will take a lot of homework. So move quickly, but strategically. Specific is terrific. I know that sounds silly and cheesy perhaps, but it makes a lot of sense, because none of us, especially as startups, have the time or resources to be just, like I said, casting the net really wide. So what you want to do is be as specific as possible to break it down into bite-sized portions so that you can really get the results that you want, and especially out of the testing process. Measure twice, cut once. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it's just been it's a common phrase that I grew up with in school. You know, just being told to be really careful, to be sure, but then once you drop the knife, you got to cut, and be sure about where you're cutting. The reason why I suggest this is because there are no do-overs, really. There's only evolution and change and evolution and change. It's really, really impossible to find the same opportunity twice. So, think it through and, think strategically, and then just do it and go for it. I encourage you to talk to people, talk to anyone. A network will save you. Obviously knowledge and experience, of course, but networking in Asia is basically second to none. I think networking everywhere is important, and hence, what Brinc does and bringing people together is so just such a big piece of that. But in Asia, it's really who you know. So talk to people, talk to your competitors, talk to, there's nobody who you shouldn't talk to in all of this. I would encourage you to constantly be asking questions and looking for answers and just having that learning posture. A lot of people come into Asia and they are frustrated and they are overwhelmed, and then they are very confused. And I can tell you that will eventually go away, but you have to have a learning posture to just know that, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. And I'm here to learn and grow and, develop this as I'm moving along. For those of you who have heard this before, I mean, this just, it applies pretty well here. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's from Peter Drucker, a very well-known management consultant. And it just means that, you can plan and think through all the strategies that you can imagine. But ultimately, you need to test your strategy in an actual culture, because culture trumps all in the end. The environment, the team, the people, the nuances, all of that can completely debunk your strategy. And so, just taking this to heart and thinking through that, yes, we can plan, but it all comes down to implementing a strategy in an actual culture. And to help you with that, and coming back to how many cultures and languages and styles of working and all that kind of thing are in Asia, I am recommending that you read the Culture Map. This is not a sponsored endorsement. I'm not getting any money for promoting this book, but I have read this book and it is one of the best. And my colleagues and fellows in the industry have also wonderful things to say about this book. If you're looking into cross-cultural work in any context, I would recommend this, but specifically when you're coming into Asia and all the diversity that is here, this will help you immensely in understanding the people you're doing business with and all the people that you're trying to serve with your product, your audiences. And so there's a recommended read for you. And that leaves us to Q&A. I went really quickly through that, so happy to clarify anything if it wasn't, or if it just went by too fast. But would love to hear from you. Anything that I'd said previously. Andrew?
Hello, Hannah. I think you cut off for a second there.
Did I?
Yeah, or maybe I cut off. I didn't hear you for a couple seconds.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think if anybody has any questions, you can type it into the chat box, and I'll read them out, and then Hannah will be able to answer them. Please feel free to send over your questions. I think I can start with the question anyways, is that I guess with Asia being so diverse, and is there really an ideal entry point for a startup to look, or where do they even begin? Should they really find that local partner to help them strategize? Where do you think they should begin their search as they enter the Asian market?
Yeah. I like that you use the word, ideal entry point, and the answer is that there isn't one. And maybe there will be one in the end, but that's not what you go in looking for. So if you go in looking for that one sweet spot where, you're going to drop your app into a certain app store and it's going to get, a million, downloads in the first 5 seconds, you're going to be really disappointed, because that's just not how it happens. I think when you're going through the path portion of what I described earlier, that's when you're exploring several different entry points. And I say several, but I don't say several hundred, so you're not just throwing it around everywhere. But you are looking at, okay, 4 or 5, or, 5 or 6 more high possibility entry points, and then doing more research. So you might then find a local partner or some kind of local resource to then dig into those possibilities. And it's really about narrowing it down, right? You've got all of Asia, then you've got your possible entry points, and then you find the right ones that are for you. And in the end, it might narrow down to like 1 or 2 where neither of them are really 100% ideal, but maybe that's the way it is, that you go with as much as you can to develop it and just see how it goes. And it might evolve into something else. So there is no ideal, but definitely I would say with the research that I suggested, thinking through all those things, you should narrow down to about, anywhere from 3 to 5 potential ones to start with.
Thank you for that advice. Any other questions from anybody else? I have another one anyways, so I'll shoot it over another question. I guess based on your experience of working with the different clients that you've worked with, is there any kind of unexpected stories that you can share that happened, that these teams had no idea this was an issue, and it arose while you guys were strategizing and planning to enter the Asian market?
I'd say there's always unexpected things. So part of having the plan is that you can dedicate your energy to the unexpected. Does that make sense? So if you don't have a plan, then your energy is just spread up across the board. But if you have a plan, at the very least, you've planned for the unexpected, in that sense that it will be there. So you can better use your energies. I would say that the most unexpected things that have happened are usually the people part. And that's why it got its own box, earlier in the slides, because people put so much attention to the product or service or whatever, people do so much thinking and strategizing on product development, but they often forget about the team or the people or the network or whatever it is, the people who are going to support this process. And so you have a great product coming in, but then the team can't work together well with local partners because they didn't imagine how difficult, how confusing, how frustrating, how much they would have to adapt just in order to get regular communications or operations going and all that kind of stuff. So I would say the thing that gets overlooked the most often is the people part. So to pay more attention to that up front. Interesting.
Is there a specific example that you can share? I look, I have a story about one of the.
Well, there's so many stories. But I would just say that cross-cultural teams in and of itself is no joke. The way decisions are made, the way people communicate, the way, like I said, time zones earlier, and it may sound so silly, like, okay, so you just look at a calendar, deal with time zones, but people don't understand the implications of what it means that you have to wait 12 hours for a response. Okay. Or in some cases, so if you have to wait 12 hours for a response, what does that do to your overall operations? Assuming that you have an operations that are very time sensitive, or what happens when you can't get the help on the ground as immediately as you need it to be? What happens when you have different cultures in one team and people don't communicate in the same style, and that leads to really bad decisions? Just things like that it sounds small, when I say it like this, but when you really play it out, it really has wide-ranging implications. And that's just within the team. I haven't even talked about, then you've got vendors, suppliers, all this other kind of stuff. When you deal with that cross-culturally, whereas especially when it's East meets West, there's a lot of things that can take place that will derail a perfectly good product. Because the people part's not thought of.
Thank you, Hannah. That's definitely something that I've realized over my time working in Asia and seeing and working with global organizations is that people do overlook that as they expand here, and it's a problem that is constantly overlooked. So I think we have a question from Joel, one of our portfolio companies.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Hannah, how are you? I'm not sure if my video's on or not. I can't
You
tell
are.
from my phone. Oh, okay, here we are. I mean, it's such a broad topic you're dealing with. It's like if someone says, what market should I enter into the US or Europe? You know, I can name specific cities based on certain products. If you look at the Asian market in general, we're a beverage product, and I would say a new concept beverage product, etc. When you look at the Asian market in general, are there specific cities where you see a European product having more appeal to a younger consumer versus others? For example, off the top of my head, I would, of course, probably think of Singapore. I would maybe think of Hong Kong, Bangalore, and India. But are there specific cities where you say, okay, as a European food product that is appealing to a younger consumer, these are really the geographies that might be more open to this? Because you're talking such a broad market when you just say Asia. I mean, it's just so huge. But there's obviously some cities and some markets that are gaining more traction with early adopters. I mean, that's what I would look at when I would go into Asia. Unless I had a contact somewhere, I'd say, okay, where are the most early adopters for this type of product geographically?
Right.
And that's a big topic, you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously you're already thinking down the right track and in the right approach and not just like throwing it out there into, I would say when it comes to early adopters and a younger audience, for sure, what you mentioned with the big cities is where at least you want to test. So I'm not going to say that you should necessarily go there in the end, but at least as a testing market, you'll probably want to touch those first. Because in those metropolitan areas like, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Seoul, Singapore, even Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, these young people have a higher level of disposable income. They've got a lot of, there's always new things happening in the city, so they're exposed to a wider diversity of products, of international products. So you were to say, oh, there's a new European drink coming in, they'll try it. They will try it. So you at least want that testing market to start with, right? To even get to the point where you figure out where the end game is. And it could be in the end that if you start testing in, let's say, Shanghai, you realize that maybe it works at first, but it was kind of like a flash in the pan. But because it was so oversaturated, you might want to move down to like a tier 2 city in China, actually. But the testing had to start with a tier 1 to just get it out there and see what happens. Like, you got to start from somewhere, you know what I mean? And then, so eventually it might end up in like a tier 2, 3 city. So I've seen certain products that are not available in the Beijing, Shanghais, because you don't need to be there, actually. And it actually is suffocating for you to be there, because you might as well go to tier 2, tier 3, where there's less competition, but disposable income is rising. The young people are, becoming more exposed to different things. And then, you find a nice little home in a tier 2, 3 city, that kind of thing. But I would say testing, for sure, you start from the top where you get the most early adopters, and then you kind of move your way down.
That would be, Andrew, that would be an interesting list to put together. Maybe that's a good side project, even though you guys are dealing with a lot of different sectors, from technology to food tech, etc. Entry points, I think, are a good topic for people in the international market. I get asked the question about the US quite a bit because I'm from there, and also Europe, where I live now. A lot of people say, well, which market should I go into? It would be interesting to have a hit list for Asia, based on concentrations of early adopters, which might be your high-tech centers, of course, your big cities, but these tier 2 cities, which might be cheaper to enter into, might be really interesting places to bring a product into and to test it. Thinking about some of the high-tech cities in China, tier 2 cities, but there's a high concentration of tech industry, where you have a lot of younger people working in that. That would be a really interesting list for people like me and probably others to say, okay, if I do want to go into Asia, other than the obvious choices, maybe there's some unobvious choices here, but are a really good place for me to test and introduce my product.
The other thing I would say, Joel, is is about the European Association in the local markets' minds. So this will take a bit of research. Obviously, I can't go through all 50 countries, but
right.
In certain cities or certain countries, Europe, in their minds, is associated with a certain type of thing,
Right.
And then maybe it's not in the same category as beverage. Maybe beverage has no association whatsoever. So it might be really hard to get in. But if there is some exposure already, and Europeans have been known to, I don't know, you might go to a country where people are like, oh yeah, I know Europeans make beer, right? Oh, okay, so there's already some kind of mental connection there. Then there's probably a higher possibility for you. Whereas if there isn't one and they just think that, oh, Europeans only play football, and there's no association with beverages, then it's going to be harder, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, for European food products, you have a little bit of an advantage versus maybe coming from other countries, particularly when you're dealing with products that are water-based. Being from Austria or Switzerland, you have automatically a perception of very high quality.
Yeah.
Which is a nice place to start. Yeah, it'd be interesting in linking those up together on which markets those types of perceptions are strongest. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
And Joel, that's a great idea actually for us to kind of maybe do some research behind this, that we are really putting in more effort to kind of do more blog posts. And I think that's a great topic. So let's try to find the unobvious tier 2 cities. So I'll share that with the team and see if we can put together a blog post on that.
Yeah, it would be interesting because it could be, if you have to make a choice because of it takes so much upfront capital to go into a market, maybe lowering that threshold, that these are our tier 2 markets that are much cheaper for you to go into and test your product, etc. Yeah, I think that would be a valuable list.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, a list like that. So I'll definitely share that with the team.
You could be the pioneers.
Thanks. All right, I think that's it. I don't know if anybody else had any questions. Feel free to jump on really quickly. I'll give it 10 seconds. But if not, I guess thank you everyone for joining our webinar. Thank you, Hannah, for leading the webinar this month. And we hope to see you guys all at the next webinar next month. Thank you.